Hey, welcome to Status Coup today. Jordan's a little bit under the weather, so we'll be hosting today, and I am Zeynab Day, and joined by Steve Grumbine and the amazing Louis DeAngelis, who has been in East Palestine for weeks and has been covering, talking to local residents, scientists, others about what is happening in East Palestine, Ohio, following the massive Norfolk train derailment and then scheduled chemical burn that's impacting community members there, with people being sick, with people not getting help that they need, with the EPA shirking things. So we're going to be talking about that today. Steve is coming on to talk about increased interest rates, apparently, another round of increased interest rates coming from the supposed finance guru Janet Yellen is now threatening to raise our bank rates once again. So, Steve Grumbine's coming on to weave some of his magic and explain to us where all the holes in logic are in that, because there are plenty to fetter through. But when we're launching today, opening this live stream, thank you guys all for joining. We will be kicking it off at first, talking to Louis about East Palestine and what is the latest there, and about opening it up, we'll be talking about Governor DeWine. And if you guys are unfamiliar, Governor DeWine is he is the governor of Ohio. He has refused to bring in federal aid. He's refused to declare a state of emergency for the state of Ohio. He has famously everything in the hands of Norfolk Southern, but he will be speaking to Congress on Wednesday. So I'm going to let Louis weigh in on this, because Louis has been the one that's been on the ground and has been covering this day and night for Status Coup, and is kind of the expert on all things East Palestine right now, and knows way more than either one of us about what is going on. So let's kick it over to Louis.
Yeah, Governor DeWine also has a serious issues with having a consistent story and telling the truth in some cases. On my first trip there, some of you might remember, he literally lied to my face, saying that he had asked, had not returned a phone call to ask for federal aid at that point. Not very smart of him to do that in the year 2023 when everything is on video and recorded. Fortunately, Colin and Jordan were able to find the clip of him saying exactly what he told me he never said to put together. But I'm very curious to see what Governor DeWine says in his testimony in front of Congress tomorrow. I'm curious to see if some of the if he gets caught in some of these little web of lies, or if it's just going to be more of show up, get some softball questions, give your testimony, and move on. I have a feeling that that's probably more what it is. We do have an article here that I can pull up on the screen here. Governor DeWine preparing to testify from East Palestine to Congress on Wednesday. I'll read a little bit of this. As we learn more about the recent train derailment in Springfield, Ohio, Governor DeWine is preparing to testify virtually before the U.S. Senate about the East Palestine train wreck. I want the committee to feel what the people feel, the governor said. This has been very traumatic, despite the fact our tests continue to show the air is good, the water is good. We are going to continue to test the water and the air and test the soil, but the people have been traumatized. The impact of the East Palestine train derailment is something DeWine is hoping to get across to Congress, and he will have about 3 minutes to do that, to do that, he says in testimony, and he plans to do that from East Palestine. I think if they understand that, there won't be any questions that have to move forward and make some dramatic changes regarding rail safety in this country, the governor said. We'll pop back out here. The thing that sticks out to me here is that the governor is still saying the air is safe, the water is safe, we're doing the testing, everything is safe. I don't know what the big deal is. Everything's safe is what he keeps repeating here in this, and he's been saying it over and over again the last couple of weeks. And my question to him is, if the air is safe and the water is safe, why is basically at least half of the town getting sick? Why are folks getting rashes? Why are folks still getting sore throats? Why are people's eyes drying out and water, needing to having issues, and your nose when you walk into some of these homes feel like you've got like hot peppers or something underneath your nose? Why are all of these symptoms still happening, not just amongst like one or two residents, amongst most residents who are in East Palestine? How come when I was in East Palestine last week on Thursday, when I was spending some time outside interviewing a resident, the smell of chemicals in the air became overwhelming to the point where I had a bad headache for hours. I could feel it in my throat. The resident said the same thing. It's tricky because it's something, that's hard to show to people, right? Like for you all who are not there, it's difficult to show this on camera, the effects that these people are having. And unfortunately, with most of the media absolutely gone from East Palestine at this point, it's just these folks yelling out for help, but there's nobody there listening to them anymore. So, it drives me nuts to be talking to these folks. And fortunately, we're able to share these on our platforms on YouTube and on Twitter and whatnot. But people don't seem to be comprehending that the situation on the ground is still happening. These symptoms are still occurring. These smells are still happening. And then you've got officials like the governor just coming out and saying everything is safe.
On top of that, they're not testing. I mean, the EPA is literally not saying that they know it's safe. They haven't tested for dioxins. The VOC testing that they're doing test for only a certain amount of chemicals, which and you've covered. And then they're still waiting for results. And we may not know, as the EPA has stated in recent town halls, when it is going to be safe. So just for DeWine to come out and say it's safe is kind of crazy. I do have a clip here of, and it's gaslighting. It's gaslighting, and it's Governor Dewine doing the work of corporations, doing the work of Norfolk Southern to gaslight an entire community and the surrounding area that they're going to be just fine when people are literally getting sick. Not to mention, there's no medical evaluations happening for these people. So how the hell do you know if they're sick or not? Which is one thing that you talk with Russell about in a clip. If you want to talk a little bit more about DeWine and let me know, we can play this clip with Russell, because I think your exchange there between the two of you really solidifies his anger as an East Palestine resident with the way that DeWine, EPA, Biden, Buttigieg, and others have been handling the situation or not handling.
Right. Yeah, not handling it is more of the case. So to give some context on Russell, Russell is a gentleman who works in East Palestine. You can basically throw a rock at ground zero of the derailment site from his place of employment. I talked with Russell's wife off camera quite a bit. She actually works in the hotel that I was staying at and that they were staying in, because they were able to actually have their insurance company pay for relocation for at least a period of time. So they're staying at this hotel. We're staying at the hotel. I'm talking to them, and his wife pulled me aside initially, and she was like, my husband works right at the derailment. He goes in, he gets sick. He's not feeling well. She's like, look at his skin. She says to me, he's as red as a lobster. And it's hard to, you can see it a little bit in the video here, but she's like, his skin does not look that way. His skin is a different color than it used to be before this. He's constantly got a sore throat. He's constantly blowing all sorts of bloody whatever out of his nose. Sorry to get graphic here, but this is the reality of what is happening. And Russell and his wife and countless other people are dealing with all of these things on a day-to-day basis. And when they hear folks like Governor Dewine and others essentially tell them that everything's fine, they know that it's not fine. So they're getting very frustrated with the situation, and that'll come off in this clip that we can play right now of Russell.
Say, you know what? You're pissing me off with the way you're handling the situation. And you're pissing me off the way you're handling the situation. This is my family, not yours. It's that simple. I don't care if you came here and drank the damn water. You spit it back in a damn glass and you took your ass back to your $1 million home. Where are you at now? Where are we at? We're living in it. We're washing in it. You're not, and you wouldn't. Don't tell me you think your family's safe here. We're contaminated. We will be for the rest of our lives. A lot of stuff that nobody's looking at. I'm a professional. I've been doing the same thing since I met my wife. I'm a maintenance man, a millwright, whatever you want to call it. If it's broke, I can fix it. I can figure out a way to fix it. I'm contaminated, okay? So for me to find another job, thank God I have an employer right now. For me to find another job somewhere doing what I do, when I walk into a company, they give me the keys to their building, no matter what it is. It's a manufacturing company, no matter what it is. I'm the maintenance guy. Something happens, I have to fix it. I gotta get called out, I gotta fix it. I gotta be able to get into that room at any given time. So would you hire somebody that has a potential of 5 to 7 years, and then they're gonna have liver cancer, any number of things that we don't even know about yet, and you're just gonna hand your keys to your company over to that gentleman, knowing you're investing in that person at that time because of his knowledge and how he's going to help you and help your business to stay afloat? Would you do it?
Right. I mean, that's
taking the possibility that you're going to lose this employee and have to do this again in 5 to 7 years?
Right.
No.
Yeah. No, you're right.
People and professionals don't do that, and they won't do that. They look at the long haul of things.
Right. I mean, it's just again, I kind of always go back to the impossible situation that so many of these people are in. And Russell says it right there. I mean, he looks right at the camera like this isn't your family, this is my family. I should be able to this didn't happen because of me, it happened because of you all. The fact that these folks are not getting the help that not only that they deserve, but that they're owed. This didn't happen because of any fault of anybody who lives in East Palestine. This happened exclusively at the fault of Norfolk Southern. And in the vast majority of cases here, the only way that any of these residents are getting any financial assistance at all is by begging Norfolk Southern for the money. They're going to this Norfolk Southern Family Assistance Center located one town over. Why isn't it located in East Palestine? If East Palestine's safe is one of my questions, but located there. They're not giving money to people in New Waterford where the center is located. Open one in East Palestine. But that's a whole other thing.
So individuals, just to clarify, have to travel to the center.
Yes. And granted, it's only one town over. It is close, but it is still not in town, right? So they're having to leave town to go to another town to go to this center. Oftentimes there's a line. Candace DeSanzo, a resident who we had on yesterday and who I've posted several interviews with, Candace has been, as many of these people have been, keeping like a journal essentially of their health symptoms, of how much time they're waiting for these things, because that's what a lot of folks rightfully have been told by lawyers to do, to keep track of everything, keep a detailed log of all of this stuff. It took Candace 3 visits to the Norfolk Southern Assistance Center that spanned 23 hours.
Whoa.
For her to get money to relocate for 2 weeks, for her and her 5 children.
Full-time job.
Right. And that's the thing, is so many people they won't give you money. Like, she had to fight to get it for the 2 weeks. It's easy if you want, get assistance for, you can get a little bit of money for 5, not easy, but it's easier to get money for a short period of time, but then you need to keep going back and keep going back and keep going back. And meanwhile, okay, you check, you're trying to extend your stay in the hotel. Well, sorry, now the hotel is booked up longer, and now you need to check out of that hotel and then drive an hour further away from town to go stay in that hotel. And that's a whole other issue of this, of folks needing to then be bounced around. There's a lot of accusations of people, these people just want a little vacation in a hotel. No, that is not the case. Imagine staying in a hotel with 5 children and your pet in one little hotel room, and you're cooking dinner in the microwave. This is not a vacation for these people.
These are reimbursements,
right?
Right. So these individuals have to pay up front, and then they have to take the receipts to Norfolk Southern and essentially beg to be reimbursed. And what are some of I'd heard about people needing to have their Social Security cards, needing the receipts to be certain ways. What are some of the barriers that you've seen for these individuals trying to get their money back, essentially, that they're having to pay because of Norfolk Southern's actions?
So the Social Security card is one, and it's usually a Social Security card for everyone in your home, which is wild. And it's wild that they need a social security card to begin with. You're giving the railroad your social security card doesn't make sense to me. But you also need 2 proofs of residency to prove you live in the place that you live. Or if you own the home, you need proof of that. In some cases, children are needing birth certificates. I've seen in multiple instances where they're foster kids and things like this, where sometimes they don't have a birth certificate handy right there, so they're having to jump through hoops to go and need to get this. And early on in this, in particular, some of these documents weren't very clear what you needed. So folks were showing up, they were waiting in line for hours. They're getting to the front of the line, and then they're being told, "Oh, sorry, you need a social security card. Come back another day." And one woman that I spoke with brought her elderly parents with her to go and wait in this line and do this. And they were turned away because they didn't have a social security card. While they were in the assistance center, they actually called the number for the assistance center, which is not actually located in the same place, but like to a phone line for Norfolk Southern, and asked, "Do I need a social security card number or a social security card to be able to get this assistance?" And the person on the phone said, "Oh, no, you should be fine without it." But she was turned away inside of the actual building going to do it. So the system has changed a whole bunch of times dealing with that. And I will say, though, that and we put out a video on this earlier today, and this can kind of transition the conversation a little bit about the Pennsylvania side of this, as well as kind of often overlooked. This train derailed a couple 100 feet from the Pennsylvania border. If this happened just a little bit further down the tracks, this all would be happening in Pennsylvania. So the Pennsylvania Senate actually had a hearing today about this, and fortunately, the Pennsylvania senators are taking this very seriously. We heard from Pennsylvania Senator Doug Mastriano, as well as his Democratic counterpart, Katie Muth, and they both did a fantastic job asking some very difficult questions to Alan Shaw, the Norfolk Southern CEO, about all of this. Both of them really highlighting that, hey, it's very clear that these folks are still having health issues. It's very clear that things are not right with the testing. Senator Muth went as far to say is like, Alan Shaw made some sort of comment saying, "Oh, this is also like the EPA doing the testing." And the Senator Muth from Pennsylvania says, "Yeah, and unfortunately, the reality is that the EPA on multiple occasions, the Ohio EPA and the federal EPA, have lied about test results before." And she said that during the hearing, which is, I mean, it's bad when the actual officials from the state are saying like, "Yeah, that's great and all, but like these people are also lying about these situations." The unfortunate reality here, though, is there has been no long-term plan as far as how do you make these people whole moving forward. There's this short-term reimbursement money for needing to stay at another place for a while, but the reality is it's been several weeks at this point. Things are still not right in East Palestine, and a lot of folks are uncomfortable returning home. There's no long-term plan talking about, if someone wants to leave their home, about buying their home at a fair value. There's no long-term plan for even, hey, I want to relocate for 6 months. That's not a thing right now. You can't get access to something like that. And unfortunately, a lot of these folks don't have the money to be able to just make that decision on their own and pick up and leave.
Where's the federal government in this? Where is Pete Buttigieg? Where is Biden? Where is any of the FEMA type groups? I mean, at some level, you've got to have EPA involved. You've got to have FEMA, I would think, involved at some level. You would think that the transportation secretary, who many Democrats will get ready to put forward as a presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg, would be out there front. What are they doing about it?
The federal government is basically boots on the ground type stuff. I mean, the EPA is there, but like the federal government is doing absolutely nothing to help individual residents. Nothing.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, this is a small town. Like they could very feasibly put together some sort of program to offer to buy people's homes from them. Because again, it's not these people's fault that this happened in their backyard, literally in a lot of cases. I've talked to tons of residents who their backyard is the train tracks. There were burning train cars in their backyard. These people are, I mean, can you imagine that? And then you're like, okay, yep, no, go ahead. 3 days later, everything's fine and safe.
And this is rolling back. use Buttigieg or Biden, but to answer your question a little bit, Grumbine, they've got there's all this bureaucratic red tape, right? So because of what's the name of the act, if you can remember it, Lewis, that Melissa Mays talks about,
Stafford Act,
the
right?
Stafford Act. You cannot declare a state of emergency for a non-natural disaster. So that's what Governor DeWine is leaning on to say that he can't declare a state of emergency, but he can call in resources from the National Guard. He can call in resources from FEMA. There's other avenues of assistance that they're not exploring because they're leaving everything in Norfolk's hands. And then Buttigieg and Biden are washing their hands of this because they're saying, we have to get request because of state autonomy. We have to get request from Governor DeWine, so we can't do anything. So everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else, and there's only a few people that are holding accountability, such as the Pennsylvania State House, who is, who called Alan Shaw as the CEO of Norfolk Southern to testify last week as one of the things that Lewis covered, and you can find our coverage on East Palestine in our playlist on Status Coup's YouTube channel. But that's what it is, Steve. It's finger pointing. They're finger pointing based on bureaucratic nonsense. The Stafford Act needs fixed, for one, because corporations, it gives them a blank check to do whatever the hell they want and pollute everywhere and destroy the environment, and nobody can come in and help. Secondly, it's why everyone from the EPA to DeWine to Biden are all saying it's Norfolk's responsibility to clean up this mess.
Yeah. Punting out there to private industry to make them be the government is the neoliberal playbook. And this is exactly what's going on. And I want to be clear. What are we going to do? Vote a few more progressives in to fix this? I mean, this is way beyond that, right? And you're seeing these things happen, not just the derailments, but you're seeing this happen at a period of time where the entire system is falling apart. And you've got absolute fecklessness in the White House. You've got absolute fecklessness in the transportation secretary. And quite frankly, you've got people out there who are desperate, who have no real meaningful way of claiming agency to be able to get anything done. I'd be curious to see what these Democrats think of their president and their transportation secretary for literally doing absolutely nothing here.
Yeah, I mean, it's despicable that it's gotten to this point. It's been let to get kicked down the can, or kicked the can down the road for this long. And again, if you wanted help from the federal government in East Palestine right now, like, you're literally, like, if you call a representative or something like that, they're probably just going to point you to Norfolk Southern, the company that caused this problem in the first place. And Norfolk Southern at this point is basically doing nothing to try to prevent something like this in the future. I'm going to borrow a line I heard from somebody while I was on this last trip. But basically, derailments are just part of the business plan for companies like Norfolk Southern at this point. When you have 1,700 plus derailments a year, I mean, you're just planning on it at that point. You've got crews whose their sole job is to just clean up the messes and move on to the next mess to go clean it on. Derailment is part of the business plan. The federal government are the House and the Senate, they are continuing to allow this to happen by not passing any new legislation. You can blame, the Trump administration got rid of some of the regulations, but the Biden administration has been there for 2.5 years. They haven't brought any of those regulations back. You've got the Biden administration squashing the rail workers strike earlier this year. Safety was one of their top concerns. It's thing after thing after thing. And a big reason why a lot of this doesn't happen is very clear when you look into it a little bit. And it's, if you follow the money on any of this, you've got Norfolk Southern donating directly to tons of these politicians. You've got lots of these politicians owning stock in Norfolk Southern. So it goes both ways there. You've also got some huge companies involved, such as BlackRock, JP Morgan, Vanguard. Those three companies alone own 16% of Norfolk Southern. Those
not to mention the cleanup companies that, like CTEC, that are huge and take billion-dollar companies that are supposedly there to clean up, that are now capitalizing on this disaster.
Absolutely. So
this is a business model. I want to be clear, Louis and Zeynab. This is a business model. This is a This is the way it's done. This is not this instance, right? So when you understand that if the government steps in and does something, what it's fundamentally done is it's taken away an opportunity for some mid-level group to come in and make money on this situation. This is always the way it is. They purposely put their hands up and say, I don't know what to do about it here. And so until we recognize this, and I want to tell you, I had a moment of hope today. One of my Vote Blue No Matter Who friends, who's actually an elected official in North Carolina, sent me a message saying, okay, Steve, I'm on board. I give up. You're right. We cannot just vote a few progressives in and do this anymore. He and I have fought countlessly. And I've said, listen, the problem is that everybody still's wondering why the government's not doing it. That's the job. No, the job of the government, going back to the founding fathers, is to protect wealthy landowners, is to protect capital. It is not to protect you and I. We are basically new open air chattel slaves without the whips and chains. Now we just get the chemical burns. So I want to be clear. We need to recognize, if you think about what you've reported on just in this last month, if you think about what you've gone through personally in this month, multiply that by 100 times in different ways, different forms, right? Each time the government is not available to do these things. During the pandemic, houses didn't go into foreclosure. How many secondary markets for the people that flip houses and all the other stuff were bitching and moaning to government saying, hey, you got to open it back up. We're losing our ability to repo these houses and resell them. It's a secondary market. It's all about capitalism. And it's all about this government being embedded and creating the mechanizations to make this the norm. But we stay stuck in our head thinking they're there to help us. We've got to change. We got to decolonize our minds so that we start acting like revolutionaries, because this stuff isn't going away. This is business as usual. And that's the problem. I don't know how to make that any clearer. I hope that people start saying, yeah, screw that, man. I'm going to take the power back. I'm going to do something about this. Do you see hope in those people, or do you see they're completely feeling hopeless at this point?
Unfortunately, a lot of them are feeling, I mean, I'll say a lot of them are fighting hard, but a lot of them also feel hopeless, and they're seeing exactly what you just said. They're seeing that nobody is coming to help them anymore. They're seeing the only time that they can get any help at all is if they make a whole bunch of noise about it. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, essentially. And
the media has been ignoring them, Louis, except for us and a few others. Everyone's
the rock stars.
Agreed. So yeah, no, to your question though, I think, yeah, I mean, some are feeling hopeless, but I would say that a lot of them are fighting very hard. And unfortunately, these regular folks have had to become, experts on chemicals and experts on testing and experts on all of these other things, because the folks that they thought that they could trust on a lot of those topics turned out that you can't necessarily trust them at face value for what they're saying.
That's a damn shame.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you need to wrap up around this time, so I wanted to give you a moment so that you could kind of tell folks about the reporting that you did. If folks that don't know, Louis DeAngelis was on the ground in East Palestine from Monday of last week to Friday.
Wow.
So we have a ton of content that we're still getting out from those interviews. If you want to give folks some highlights, also one way that you can support is to like this stream, share this stream, sign on, become a member, subscribe. All of that stuff helps to get the message out. You can become a member at StatusCoup.com/join. That way you can get updates on everything that's going on. But I'd love to hear some because I know that we've released some of the content, but we're still getting things out because you talk to so many people. I was just watching the text and trying to wait for things to come out, and Louis is like, I'm going to go live now. I'm talking to 10 people today, and the text was like, Louis is talking to. So there's he did a lot of work while he was on the ground there.
Yes, yeah, both the first trip and the second trip were very I mean, the first trip, at least there was other media in town, so we did a ton of interviews, but like there were a lot of people in town to go talk to. This second time, it was weird. I was going around town, and a good thing, a lot of East Palestine residents are Status Coup viewers now. because they've seen that we've stayed on top of this. But I'd go around town and people would wave at me in their cars, or I'd be sitting on the side of the road and someone would pull over and say, hey, and oftentimes I'd do an interview with them. So yeah, I mean, and even I mentioned in the hotel, we did one night in our hotel. I lined up and did several interviews in the hotel with folks that I met in the morning at breakfast and this sort of thing. So unfortunate reality is that the situation in East Palestine is still bad. Don't let any of there's a lot of folks on Twitter right now, and there was an AP article that came out saying that, there's a lot of Russian misinformation now being spread about the East Palestine story, basically claiming that like, hey, everything's fine there. And again, I was there all last week. I don't have Russian disinformation in my eyeballs and in my nose that can make myself have headaches and smell the stuff and talk to person after person after person to sway my opinion. That's not how that works. So I can tell you, having been there, I can assure you that most of the people talking about that, and very, very likely the person who wrote that AP article, probably hasn't spent as much time in East Palestine as I have. So I would watch out for some of that stuff. The health symptoms that are happening there are absolutely real. These people are going to the hospital. Many of them literally have paperwork from their doctors saying that this stuff is from chemical exposure. Okay. This is an absolutely serious situation that is being taken not seriously by our federal government at this point, and it's an absolute shame.
Absolutely.
Well,
goodness, man, good work. Good work.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, and stay tuned. And where did you interview today, Louis, for people to check that out? I know you were on the Hill Rising.
I was, yeah. I think we have a link as a community post. Rising had me on with Brianna Joy Gray and Robbie Suave. I get his last name wrong occasionally, but that was a really good interview. And I thank you to them for being able to help continue to put this story out there. They've been doing a good job covering it as well. I'm glad that they had me on to share more on the ground perspective of what's actually happening there.
All right. Well, thanks, Louis. You guys go and check out our Colin has put up a whole playlist on YouTube where you can check this out. And like I said, sign up to StatusCoup.substack.com for updates. You can subscribe here for updates. So yeah, or follow us on Twitter at Status Coup for when the latest videos come out, because there was so much that we couldn't put out 20 videos in a day. So we will be bringing this content out, which a lot of it is on the ground interviews with locals there that are explaining how they're impacted by what's going on. And Louis, you rock. Thank you so much for going on the ground and talking to everybody.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
You too.
Bravo, man. Take it easy. There we go.
All right. Oh man, so much. What are some of your thoughts, Steve, on everything that's going on in EP before we move into roll into the economic issues?
Well, clearly the fact is that those people have no hope right now. Even if they have hope, they have no hope because the government's not doing it, and the government's the only one that really should and could do the right thing at this point. And the fact is that most people are willing to accept that because they are so used to the government saying we can't do anything, that we're broke, that there's inflation, that there's some other thing that's preventing them from stepping in, buying up these homes, or more importantly, just simply putting the regulations on the books to make sure these things don't happen again and actually protecting citizens. They're not going to do that because to do that would cost corporations money. I mean, you go back to playwright Arthur Miller wrote a play called All My Sons, where they created airplanes that were manufactured with faulty parts right in the middle of a war. Pilots were going down because of faulty planes, and they decided that it was cheaper to pay the insurance money for the dead soldiers than it was to actually repair the planes. This is like 1950s. So it doesn't take more, even 40s, I guess it was World War II. So it doesn't take much to think that they were already seeing this back then. Okay. Here we are in the year of 2023, and we're watching the same exact story go down. It was too expensive to manage the brakes and the regulatory environment to keep these derailments down. Now it's just easier to slow play it and just poo-poo it and know full well that the average American thinks there's inflation, the government can't pay for it. So my goodness, these poor folks are just going to suffer. Next thing you know, there'll be like a GoFundMe. There'll be a nice nonprofit that'll step in and bring brown bag lunches or something like that. It won't solve the problem. The federal government could solve the problem. It won't solve the problem. And so I think it's very important that we understand, because this rolls into all the bank failures and all the interest rate hikes and all the inflation nonsense that you see going on. It's all one big shit sandwich that they're trying to force on us. And without the proper knowledge, without the proper tools, it'll go right by you. Just be angry, but you have nothing to point to. You don't know why you're angry. You just know you're angry. Something isn't right. And I think that's the problem with this, is that people genuinely have been gaslit and propagandized. And the one thing I wanted to tell Louis before he jumped off there was, like, my God, they're sitting there telling him that he's a Russian asset providing Russian disinformation. What kind of moron doesn't realize that the United States is the biggest lying propaganda machine in the world? And we're sitting there watching Rachel Maddow with our little doe-eye faces on and thinking, oh my God, I'm the most informed person ever. Rachel Maddow said it. And then they sit there and repeat the stuff ad nauseum. The truth of the matter is I think it's a bigger insult to say, what are you, a U.S. propagandist? I mean, not a Russian propagandist. What are you, a U.S. propagandist? Because that's what I'm seeing. We are the bad guys. Period. Sorry,
I think there's plenty of global bad guys out there that fatten their own pocketbooks in countries all across the world. We're the biggest.
We're the biggest.
It happens everywhere. But the fact is, you can hear from people in East Palestine yourself. You know, Louis has interviewed dozens and dozens of people. There are, you can hear it straight from the words of DeWine's mouth that it's not, that, you know, gaslighting that it's safe, while the EPA is turning around and talking out the other side of their mouth saying, well, we want you to feel safe. We want you to feel confident. Is it safe? Well, we don't know if it's safe yet. Well, then why the hell are we here? Yeah.
What is his game? Why is DeWine doing that? For what purpose? Because why doesn't he olay to the government? Why doesn't he olay to the federal government and say, hey, listen, Norfolk Southern, they ain't my problem. They're your problem. And they have interstate railways here. Why aren't you involved, government? What is the point of him running?
Because of the Stafford Act, the government is like, oh, you can't really file a state of emergency. And the DeWine's going, meh, I support austerity politics anyway. So let's just force Norfolk Southern to clean it all up, right? Because DeWine's exact words were that Norfolk Southern made the mess. They should be the ones to clean it up. So he's centering cause for what reason instead of centering people's lives. And when you talk about it's too expensive, let's be clear on what Steve is saying. It's not that it's too expensive to do this. It's that it loses too much money for the billionaires that are profiting off of the bottom dollar politics and bottom dollar economics that they're actuating every day, that they're working in every day, where they're saying, okay, we're not going to have 2 conductors on the trains. We're only going to have 1. Okay, you know, checking between the brake systems at 2 minutes, that's too long. Let's boil it down to 45 seconds. How about we not update the railroad tracks in poor communities, because it's, you know, the railroad tracks look really damn nice in wealthy communities and the more metropolitan areas. And then when you get into poor communities, they haven't updated those tracks sometimes in generations.
That's
literally
true. You know, when you go through those rich neighborhoods,
wreck in the poor communities and just cover it up, which they have 1,700 train derailments per year, than it would be in a wealthy community. So they get that shit done in the wealthy communities, but in the poor communities, they'll just let the tracks the metal rot off the tracks.
Yeah, when you go in rich communities, those railways, they look like a work of art almost. I mean, just like the well-groomed median strips and the nicely marbled overpasses and everything else. I mean, they make the infrastructure look just top notch. But the reality is that we have to, as a nation, because this is a small subset, and we can say, oh, well, they can't do anything because it's right here. But as a nation, this is happening everywhere. And I think that it's time. I think sadly, we got to stop looking to AOC. We got to stop looking to Rashida Tlaib or looking to Joe Biden or whoever, and we got to start
Marjorie
looking at each
Taylor
other.
Greene. I'm having leftists now say Marjorie Taylor Greene's the answer. No, because AOC's not the answer doesn't mean the other answer is another politician on the
That's
right.
right.
And
It's
that
us.
is
We're the
logic
answer.
from
We're the
people.
answer.
Because
We're
I'm
the
from
answer.
Appalachia, so people look in all directions. You know, they're not red, they're not blue, they're not anything. They're just like whoever will bring me solutions. So, you know, I do hear a lot of people that are in the leftist bubble kind of focus on the squad because they're trying to get people switched over, you know, to seeing that the Democratic Party is broken. In my area, people need to see that the Republican Party is broken. 62% of seats in Kentucky go unchallenged. So right now we have minority rule in our state house. Ohio's the same way. Did you know that the bulk of seats in Ohio go unchallenged every year? So in their state house up there, most of those people in the state house who aren't pressuring the government like they are in Pennsylvania, it's because the Dems haven't ran anyone there, or the Republican, they haven't ran any challengers there in the last decade. When you have no one to vote for but one person on the ballot, that's not an election, and that's what they've got in Ohio in a lot of these places. So that's one reason the state house isn't doing anything, because they just got rich fat cats sitting up there that got their seat handed to them and didn't even have a challenger in their elections. A lot of people don't realize that. But there was many elections, there was no challenger in Ohio. Pennsylvania, tons of challengers. Pennsylvania is doing some shit about what's going on. You can see the difference. And right now, Ohio is pretty much crickets on this in their state house, and their representatives aren't doing squat.
Yeah. What's our next subject?
Let's see. We've got one super chat from Humorous, so I'm going to play that, and then we can hop into the Fed raising interest rates on us again, and and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's argument she made again this round. So we'll hop into that and play a clip, but we'll go ahead and read this super chat from Humorous. Okay, Humorous. Thank you so much for the $100, Humorous. That's very generous. Not one person in the country has ever asked how we will fund war. But if one person in this country asks for clean water to drink, food for their children, or a roof to keep them out of the weather, every single person in this country asks, how are we going to pay for it? I think a lot more people are realizing that that line is BS. It's the media that always says, how are we going to pay for it? It's the citizens and the residents that are saying, we're already paying for war. Why can't we pay for healthcare? So that gives me a little bit of hope, Humorous. I actually think that the people are in a different place than our media is. What do you think, Steve?
I think we're getting there, but I think that we still got a lot of people out there that are waiting for tax dollars to pay for things. And because you can't shake the taxpayer myth, I think we're stuck there for a while. And that's an unfortunate fact, but that's the deal. That's the experience I have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand. Okay, let's see here. Let's talk about Janet Yellen. Let's see. Can you pull up the tweet from Janet Yellen, Colin, for us so that we can see what she's up to right now? Oof, that's a little hard to see. Oh, there we go. You want to... Let's see. Do you want to read that off, or do you want me to, Steve?
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead. Yellen's speech today ducks a lot of the key substantive questions. Does the Biden administration want to repeal the 2018 Dodd-Frank rollback? Does it want to backstop all deposits? Should more banks pay into the DIF? I don't think we know, and this speech doesn't say. That might be too small for my bad eyes, and I don't have my readers on. So
I got you. Importance of a broad and diverse banking system. Given recent developments, I think it is important to refrain a broader point. Our dynamic and diverse banking system is critical to the American economy. Large banks play an important role in our economy, but so do small and mid-sized banks. These banks are heavily engaged in traditional banking services that provide vital credit and financial support to families and small businesses. They also increase competition in the banking sector and often have specialized knowledge and expertise in the communities they invest in. Indeed, many of these banks have played an important role in supporting our economic recovery. In the depths of the pandemic, Treasury was tasked with getting money quickly and responsibly to those who need it. So we worked closely with many of you and to send economic impact payments to millions of families. Oh, must be talking about the PPP. People also worked with us to deliver advance payments from the enhanced child tax credit, which helped cut child poverty nearly in half in 2021. Where are we at now? And we've recently collaborated to rapidly deploy assistance to hundreds of thousands of homeowners financing foreclosure. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. What do you
Ready?
think? Yeah,
So
that's
here's the thing.
That's where
Here's
I'll
the
start.
thing.
That's my only comment, but I want to hear you dive into it more.
There's a couple really important things, and I think part of it is that regular people don't understand banking. That's number one. Number two is that the way the banks are set up with FDIC, 250,000 is the max deposit that is insured. It's not the bank that's being bailed out in this case. It's the depositor. So if you and I, sell our home or whatever, 250,000 sounds like a lot if you've got zero. But 250,000 is nothing compared to someone like Bezos who has 124 billion, right? So let's keep it real, yo. And so in this space, what happens is that banks, because they only have that $250,000 FDIC insurance, a lot of corporations, rightly or wrongly, other wealthy people, business leaders, etc., they end up getting like 100 bank accounts where they go up to 250,000 in each one of them because they know that each account is only insured up to 250,000. So now you'll have a company that maybe have 30 or 40 accounts with 250,000 in each. The reality is that banks should, because we need to strip away the lie that banks are private, when in reality, banks are public purpose entities that have been bastardized and turned into nuclear waste by being deregulated. Okay. Each bank has a charter from the federal government. Deregulation has allowed them to look very much like wildcat, just free riders, just doing whatever they want. And they are doing whatever they want. So we need to make banking boring again, but we needed to guarantee all deposits because we're already guaranteeing all deposits anyway, as long as people spread it out over a bunch of accounts, which is the way they typically do it. The unique thing about places like the Silicon Valley Bank and others, these regional banks or smaller banks, typically they are specialized. They have different purposes than a regular bank does. And because of that, there was some rollbacks that occurred in 2018. There was some rollbacks in terms of actual regulatory framework, but we don't have a regulatory bot.
Rolled back to prevent venture capitalism from creating a bubble like it did here, where the FDIC had to be instigated, because most of these payouts from Silicon Valley Bank that we were having issues with was payroll. A lot of people's paychecks. So this was a lot of money that was actually going to regular working class people. But with Dodd-Frank getting rolled back, venture capitalism was able to spike, especially in Silicon Valley, after we'd already seen booms and bust with things like Enron and other issues with venture capitalism.
Right. Well, in this particular case, it was unique because what had happened was that we had low interest rates to no interest rates, like pretty much a zero interest rate policy for as long as I can remember. I mean, it's been in place forever. And so what people did was they bought bonds. What they do with the money that they have is they buy bonds to secure, in ebbs and flows in the economy. So if a bunch of people pull money out, they have a certain amount of liquidity, and they have long-standing investments, short investments that can be quickly rolled into liquidity. And so what they did was they completely forsake half of their risk portfolio, which was to address if interest rates rise. So they didn't have any risk mitigation for rising interest rates. The Fed knew this, and the Fed kept going with a very aggressive interest rate hike. And what that did was, because this Silicon Valley Bank and many others, by the way, it's not just them, many others forsook this long-term view of what happens if interest go up, because we didn't think it would happen. And so now what you've got is once interest rates rise, these fixed rate, long-term 30-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 15-year bonds, they have a very low interest rate, like 1-2%. Now all of a sudden interest rates 7%. These folks are literally losing money on the other side. And to order to liquidate their assets so that they could pay out deposits, they ended up having to sell their bonds at a loss, and they ended up going broke. And this is what happened. This is the big problem here. Okay. Now, all this is you can focus on the one side of the fraud, which would be the bank side of it. But from the side of the tiny investor, what is funny is that there were no tiny investors here. These were obviously rich Silicon Valley oligarchs, VCs, you name it. Okay. But what happens in a regular bank where regular people are, and maybe they just sold a home, or maybe their grandparent died and they got some inheritance from it. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying these are real scenarios that you've got to legislate when you're building these things. And they're purposely not building it to where regular people will be able to survive in this. But to be fair, most people don't have 250,000, so FDIC is perfectly fine, right? But with the interest rates going up right now, number one, all interest does is make money cost more. It makes credit costs more. And it's a basic income for people that already have money. And so by lowering the value of those long-standing bonds, it caused that collapse. It could happen many other times. But on the flip side, the purpose, the intent of the interest rate hikes is to literally create the conditions to start mass layoffs. That is the purpose, to create unemployment. And so you're sitting there looking at an economy that still sucks, but people are getting employed. People are finding jobs. They're shitty jobs. They don't have good benefits, etc., but they're employed. And the way the Fed works and the way that their playbook operates, it's a triple austerity model. They raise interest rates. They literally intend to create the conditions for layoffs. And then by doing that, then the rich come in, like the secondary markets I was talking about, like cash for clunkers. What happened there? People that were in the business of selling used parts and stuff like that, they were having a real rough go. People that are in the flipping of houses business, they were having a real rough go. My heart cries for them, little teeny violin. But the reality is that's the way they've set up the economy. They built the economy with these predators baked into the economy, kind of like, little pill bugs that just eat the bottom feeder stuff. They just get rid of all the rot like a fungi, right? Except not a good fungi. So in any event, watching interest rates rise.
I always ask that question. Who are they?
Who are they? They would be the bankers. They would be the politicians. Remember this, when we saw the Great Recession, the huge collapse of the housing market in 2008 and 2009, you had members of industry, huge members of industry, all the big revolving doors from JP Morgan, Citi, and all the rest of them coming in and out of government, creating the conditions, creating the laws, creating the new regulations, and then bouncing back to industry to capitalize on it right immediately thereafter. So the financial institutions and the government, they're working in love. They're inseparable. They're one. And that's the problem. That is the capture. And because the government is captured.
We've got a clip from Janet Yellen, and I know that you can't stay on a lot past 6, so I want to go ahead and get this clip so that you can. I think it's a good juxtaposition to what you've been explaining about austerity politics and how the system is built to fail, but to fail at the level of people that are in poverty and for the working poor, but then to have gains for the wealthy. And reading over what she was saying, and I think she's going to repeat some of that here, hey, we gave you the child tax credit and it brought kids out of poverty. Well, where the hell are those kids now? Because we're not getting that tax credit and our unemployment rate is terrible. Like the real unemployment rate is terrible. Yep. And a lot of the wins that she listed there had nothing to do with the banking collapse, had nothing to do with them raising interest rates. It was all just a bunch of bullshit. And the things that she was naming as wins aren't permanent wins. But let's hear what she has to say here. If you want to go ahead and play that video, Colin, or I could click on it.
Let me be clear. The government's recent actions have demonstrated our resolute commitment to take the necessary steps to ensure that depositors' savings and the banking system remain safe. Our approach had two main pillars. First, we worked with the Federal Reserve and FDIC to protect all depositors in the resolutions of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. The steps we took were not focused on aiding specific banks or classes of banks. Our intervention was necessary to protect the broader US banking system. And similar actions could be warranted if smaller institutions suffered deposit runs that pose a risk of contagion. I believe that our actions reduced the risk of further bank failures that would have imposed losses on the Deposit Insurance Fund, which is paid for through fees on banks. Second, we announced a new facility to provide additional liquidity to the banking system. The Fed's new lending facility, the Bank Term Funding Program, is designed to help banks meet the needs of all of their depositors. The situation is stabilizing, and the US banking system remains sound.
Okay. So the banking system remains sound. They have now opened up a new department, apparently, to help with management of banking fluidity, which she doesn't go into any. Nothing really not a lot of context has been released on this yet, and she doesn't go into any descriptions. So what's your takeaway from these are the reasons that she's saying, one, interest rates are being raised, and two, how they're going to solve any future runs on banking, but doesn't actually address the core of the problem.
Well, why don't we start with the most important elephant in the room? Janet Yellen, if banks were private and they were kings of the world and they didn't have to answer to the government, wouldn't have a damn thing to say about banking regulations or anything else. Banks are subordinate to the federal government. Anyone that says otherwise doesn't understand. That does not mean that banks are behaving as subordinate to the government. Banks are behaving.
How are they subordinate to the government?
They were spoken to existence by the government. Their charter exists by decree of the government. The government could take that right away from them. The dollar that they use is a patent of the US government. It's not their creation. And therefore, they have been given special rights based on their charter to be able to issue loans out in the dollar-denominated IOUs that become loans. That is the only thing, okay, that keeps them even in the game. If the US government pulled their charter, they would cease to exist. They would become shadow banks. They'd be out there betting, doing CDOs and other kind of nonsense, which is why it speaks to larger regulation required. But regulation without an apparatus to actually police and actually have teeth to make real arrests, white collar arrests, which you didn't see a single one in the Obama administration. You didn't see any in the Trump administration, and you see none in the Biden administration. The fact is that we could have 1 million regulations. You could have a gazillion of them without the body, without staffing, without funding the apparatus that actually monitors and controls these things. Without having that in place, all the regulation in the world is useless. And the reality is, we've seen it. There is capture. And because of that capture, we're watching industry, from the trains, which we just saw with Norfolk Southern, to the banks we're seeing with the Silicon Valley Bank, and even on a global scale with Credit Suisse. We're seeing this play out over and over again. But there's something very unique in the United States, and that's these small and regional banks. Talked to a gentleman who's a brilliant economist and auditor in Canada. It's like, our banks are literally rock solid. There are none of these weird things. We have made it so that our banks are literally like boring and do their job. In the United States, we have specialized and deregulated and made it so that it's the wild, wild west all over again. The very conditions that created the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and took 7+ years to get to where we got sort of back to normal, Those conditions still exist today. The same predatory nature is still occurring today. Nothing has fundamentally changed. And so until we get a grip on this, I mean, think about this. How many of these Congress critters do you know that walk in the door, that have full training on banking, that really understand banking regulations, that understand anything about the money creation process, even though Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution gives Congress themselves the power of the purse? How many of them do you think even know that? And you see folks out there, they come up with a million Rothschilds. It's got to be the Rothschilds, the blood oath, the blah, blah, blah. And so folks just fill in the blank when they don't understand. And they laugh all the way. When the minute they start seeing the boogeymen of the Rothschilds come out, they go, okay, we don't have to worry about them anymore. They're just sufficiently distracted. Let them go over there and play with Ron Paul and gang. So we've got to understand that right here, right now, the devil is staring us in the eye, laughing at us, and knowing full well that we're too propagandized and really, quite frankly, too powerless on our own merit to fight back without the knowledge. The knowledge is that the United States government is supreme here. And if the United States government, which is able to go across the globe and literally create hell for every other country, but it can't create hell for its own Federal Reserve. See, this is the show. This is why there's books like The Creature from Jekyll Isle that gets people spun up around the axle. This is why there's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It's like the FedEx, all the edgy, cool guy comments, right? The Federal Reserve was spoken into existence by Congress in 1913. Its charter has been changed 100 times since then. There's zero preventing Congress from stepping in and literally saying, this is what you'll do, and this is only what you'll do, and nothing more will you do. And there's nothing to prevent that. There's nothing preventing them.
That's their power. That is the Congress's power is the power of the purse. And that kind of reminds me of, we did have a super chat here from Robert Coughlin, and he asked, what does Steve think about public banks? And I think that kind of leads into maybe the direction you were heading with this.
so let's talk about that for a minute, right? So right now, all the banks you see out there, it's going to shock you when I say what I'm about to say. Every single one of these banks is a public bank. You just don't realize it because they've been deregulated and they've been allowed to chase a profit motive. So by creating a public banking parallel, you're just basically saying, hey, we're going to regulate these public banks, unlike what we did with these now pseudo-private banks, okay? But the end game with the public banks is unless you have the regulatory environment that you needed for the private banks that we're talking about, the public banks need regulation too. And so the idea of having regulation, I say nationalize every single failing bank, every single one of them. Literally take it from the hands of the owners and literally make it 100% national. Make this shit boring as hell. Make it so that nobody that looks cool, only pocket protectors and greasy hair down the side, the old school way it used to be with the little brim and everything, only those guys with the, hey, let me punch the numbers on this adder machine here. Those are the guys that need to be in banking again. We need to get the slick Ricks and the guys that are glad handing and the lounge lizards out of the banking industry. We don't need any more wolves of Wall Street. We need to get them the hell out, make banking boring again. But I like public banks because the alternative at this point is to go after the private banks, the deregulated banks, and really put teeth in it. And you've already seen the push-pull. They are not going to bite the hand that feeds. So there's a problem. So the only alternative at this point in some people's eyes is to create public banks. Problem is, where does money come from? The money comes from the Federal Reserve, period. Okay. And yes, you can get depositors to put money in. And now you're creating these kind of co-op banks, but those things do not have enough strength. They don't have enough power to do what the federal government can do. They are very, very restricted in what they're able to do in terms of just size and purpose.
Our public banks aren't regulated by the public at this time. I mean, because if you look at what our government is doing, our elected officials, our state houses, as I had mentioned before, almost all of the quote unquote red states aren't red. They aren't even conservative. If you look, according to Ballotopedia, which was one of my sources because they're awesome, Most of these seats in these states, especially the local, and this includes regulation that these states pass, because there's statewide regulations on banking as well. There's not only federal regulation. The regulations that are being passed, or the lack of regulations and the breaking down of regulations, which is what we've seen more in the last 15 years, this is all being done by minority rule. And I say minority rule because if you have representatives that don't have anyone challenging them, and they're just seated and the voter turnout is hardly anything, that's not representative of the public that they're supposed to be representing. So that's one of the problems that we have right now. So when we look at privatized banking, and I would love to hear your comments on this, when we look at privatized banking or public banks, we have to think, who is regulating those public banks right now? And where do we need to get to in order to make sure that those public banks are also regulated to benefit the people and not the elite and wealthy few?
Well, I want you to think about this. Bill Black, who is one of my favorite lawyers and law professionals and law professors, he's a brilliant professor. He states point blank that there's 2,000 entities, like in Wall Street, for example, 2,000 businesses under one auditor's jurisdiction. One.
Could you imagine that workload?
I just want you to imagine the idea of regulation being meaningful. How would you think about it. How would you staff a regulatory body at the federal level, at the state level? I mean, we would never be out of jobs if we actually staffed the work we have in front of us. If the government actually paid the pay for professionals in these areas to do their job. It's quite clear that the law on the books is there merely to pay lip service, because there is nowhere near sufficient regulatory ability to police it, period. So, I mean, this is where funding kicks in. You must, my favorite, Warren Mosler often says, if you unleash an animal like the banking system on the public, you must have a regulatory body with teeth to go along with it. If you can't regulate it, then you shouldn't fucking create it. And so that's the problem we have right now. And so as far as the public banks go, the private banks go, all banks go, any bank that has a charter to operate, no matter what, we need to have a regulatory body that is both strong enough and not captured, not part of industry, not like union leaders that are playing golf with industry leaders. We're talking about people that have a real, there's some friction there, right? It's not just we're best friends and we hang out and we watch each other's kids on Friday night. There's got to be some friction. There's got to be some tension. I am here to make sure you do your job. You will obey what I say because I am on top in this case. But they don't do that. And it's not going to happen. It's really not going to. I think, I'll be honest with you, I don't care how many uncontested states or uncontested seats there are. At the end of the day, industry has said, we're doing this, and the federal government all the way to the top, every deep state bureaucrat all the way through, they are part of this, and this is not going away until we make it go away. I don't know how we make it go away. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I could read 1,000 books on theory. I could give a great speech. It doesn't make a shit's bit of difference until the people are pissed and angry enough to say, I'm not taking it anymore, and literally become ungovernable. Do something different than what we're doing now. And I don't see that happening. I'll be honest with you. I don't see it happening. I think they've got us stretched to the point where we're afraid to take a day off from work for fear of losing our job. We know they're trying to lay people off, so we know jobs are going to be shitty. We know things are going to get way worse coming up here soon, because with interest rates, it's not an immediate thing. These things are lagging indicators. So this is why when they did stupid stuff in the Clinton administration at the end of his term, it came out in the Bush administration. Okay, this is what's going to happen now.
A lot of times,
these lagging indicators.
What happens in a presidency until even sometimes as long as a decade after. Some of the things that we saw during the Trump administration were rolled out and started as way back as Bush, as far back as Clinton, and fallout from the Obama administration. Now, during the Biden administration, we're seeing some of the fallout of the Trump administration. These are things that happen, but the big bankers, the corporations, they're schooled in where we're headed based on legislation. It's like they have the crystal ball of where it can take them and how they can profit off of it, right? They saw the housing market bubble coming because of the stock market crashing 3 times during Clinton's administration, because of the Iraq War, and because of other issues that were happening in our country that was breaking apart people's ability to pay these inflated mortgages. And so they systemically and systematically pushed people out of their homes and made us a renting class. The middle class went from being a class that had home ownership to a class that became renters. And that's what most millennials are. We can't buy homes. Millennials, yeah, I'm right. Yeah, some of us can, but it's rare and far between. And while homes are sitting empty, broken, they're raising interest rates. And also, one of the things that's been changed through this time is the way that credit scores are done and navigated and accounted for. So at this point, you used to be able to just pay your bills and you'd have good credit. Now you have to take out a credit card. You have to take out home loans. You have to make sure that your credit score is at what, 750 to even rent a home now, which is causing our homeless rates to skyrocket. So it's like layers on a shit cake.
It's austerity.
Yeah, it's austerity. And I think that, and it is to keep workers in our place and to keep us where, they're having to pay out less for us, and where there's less competition in the marketplace for us to find other work, so that we'll work for, pennies on the dollar of what we should be getting paid, so that they can keep their engines running and they can buy their yachts.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember this part of this bank run that happened was people betting against the banks and betting against interest rates, shorting the interest rates. What happened during the great financial crisis was people were betting against the mortgages. Mortgages have always been a standard. They're going to pay. People don't want to lose their home, so they're always going to pay. The problem was they started taking away all of the restrictions and all the protections from robo-signing and all these different aspects of just pushing paper through and inflating the appraisers were hyper inflating the housing price for tax revenue for this local market. And because states are dependent on property values going up, it's the only way they get increased revenue. So there was a bunch of people's hands in the kitty. It was way more involved than what it seems. And the reality is that there was such elite control fraud then and now that is going on, that is left unpoliced and absolutely completely out of control, that I don't foresee any way out of this short of revolution. That's just my take on it. And on that happy note, I have to go feed my chillin'. So I will talk to you later, Ms. Zeynab. Thank you so much for having me back. It's been good. It's been a long time.
Where can people find you, Steve?
I'm at Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. Please check me out. I do a show Monday, Wednesday, Friday called The Rogue Scholar. Saturdays at 8 a.m. Eastern time, we release my podcast, Macro and Cheese. If you want to hear and learn more about the economy, I talk about it constantly. And of course, you can catch me here usually on Tuesday evenings. And we take a few weeks off, but let's get ready to grumble, hopefully coming back here shortly too.
Glad you're back, Steve, and glad you're feeling better.
Thank you so much. We'll see y'all later.
All right. So one of the things kind of to end on the note of what Steve was talking about, and the layers, the complexity, the shit cake, as I was talking about, one of the things that happened during the housing crisis that's continuing to happen today is the fact that student loans, student colleges, so we're talking about state universities, and some of you guys in the chat may know this. Some of you guys viewing may have been able to go to a state college or a community college at the time when federal subsidies, meaning that the federal government paid a lot higher proportion of the student loan debt. So for the actual tuition for universities up until the early 2000s, was paid at around 75 to 85% for state universities and community colleges. So we essentially had tuition-free college for folks. Now, as of, it's been cut back since around 2001, 2002, so before the 2008 recession, it had been cut back to the point where now the federal government only pays in 12% into our tuitions for folks going to school, getting an education, getting a trade at community colleges. So the students went from only having to pay 12% of the tuition to now having to pay 85%. So with millennials having that additional debt and other folks who went to college to seek careers having this additional debt, on top of that is part of what caused the housing bubble. It's also what's causing our recession today. And so that's one thing to keep in mind when they're talking about raising interest rates. It's not necessarily going to impact student loans, but student loan debts are about to come due. Interest rates are going up. Job acquisition is going down. Our economy is, groceries are expensive. You guys know, eggs were what, $12 last month in places, which is insane. It's not a bit funny. It sucks. So, appreciated having Steve on to break it down for us, to explain the layers of austerity politics as we look at Janet Yellen again talking about, protecting the banks over people, which is what we've seen time and time again, while it's the very people who control most of these banks, aside from maybe some of the federal credit unions, some of the local banks that might be a little bit more geared toward individuals or geared toward the community. Most of them are geared toward the elite, the millionaires and the billionaires that, take advantage of us every day. What I'm going to do now is go through some of the super chats and then end with our final story, which is about climate change. So not good news, but we'll be going through that as well. Let's see. We've got Robert Copland. We shared that one earlier. Tony Dallas. Thank you so much, Tony Dallas, for the super chat. Janet Yellen went to school with Professor Richard Wolff. She knows better than what she's saying. It's just a shame how power changes people. Right, Tony? They get into the system. They have this responsibility to not only maintain their power, their image. Don't discount how much narcissism plays into this, but also they become part of the system. So they start peddling the dialogue and peddling the talking points and peddling the propaganda. Okay, Double K, thank you so much for the super sticker, Double K. We appreciate that. Dave L, thank you so much for the super chat, Dave. Rothschild paranoia is what Richard Hofstadter called the paranoid style in American politics back in 1964. It was like he could look into the future and see Alex Jones. That's true. And I think that that's a good kickback, because historically we've been kind of gearing up to this rhetoric, Alex Jones style rhetoric, for about 3 decades now. All right, let's go in, and if you can, Colin, there is an article about climate change. If you could pull that up for us so that we could talk about what's going on there. So the UN just released a UN climate change report. Catastrophic warming will claim lives without action. So this is a story in the Washington Post. If you could scroll down just for the first couple paragraphs, we'll kind of get an idea of what's going on. Human activities have transformed the planet at a pace and scale unmatched in the recorded history, causing irreversible damage to communities and ecosystems, according to one of the most definitive reports ever published about climate change. Leading scientists warned that the world's plan to combat these changes are inadequate and that more aggressive actions must be taken to avert catastrophic warming. Let's go on down to see what types of, okay, here. The report released Monday from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found the world is likely to miss its most ambitious climate target, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial temperatures within a decade. Beyond that threshold, scientists have found climate disasters will become so extreme people cannot adapt. Heat waves, famines, infectious disease will claim millions of additional lives. Basic components of the Earth system will be fundamentally irreparably altered. Okay, let's see if they have any solutions in here of what they've talked about we might need. I thought I was reading that earlier. Thank you. Mondays, thanks, Colin. Monday's assessment synthesizes years of studies on the causes and consequences of rising temperatures, leading UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to demand that developed countries like the United States eliminate carbon emissions by 2040, a decade earlier than the rest of the world. With few nations on track to fulfill their climate commitments, and with the development of the world already suffering disproportionately from climate disasters, yes, it's not a future problem. We had the wildfires in California every year for the last 4 to 5 years. We've had massive hurricanes, we've had floods, we had massive flooding in Kentucky, we had massive flooding across Appalachia. We have had windstorms. We have had flooding in Miami for the last several years. So not only are the water tables rising, it's happening at a faster pace. And a little known fact about me, I was one class away from being a geology major. So I did a lot of study on climate change, the hothouse effect, the greenhouse effect. And it is true. We are, as a natural planet, moving toward what's called a hothouse effect. There is a warming effect, but industrialization, pollution, the heating of our atmosphere is causing that to increase at a more rapid pace. And we are seeing the fallouts from that. We're seeing the fallouts from that not only in warmer temperatures and droughts and lack of rain. We're seeing it in more rain in certain areas. We're seeing it in flooding. We're even seeing it in blizzards, because that's what happens. Our weather is becoming destabilized as glaciers melt, as our ice tables melt. We're going to see more rapid change. And it looks like the UN is ringing the bells again on this. And while steps have been taken, industry has again and again, just like we're seeing in East Palestine, just like we've seen globally. Oh, Tony, I'll get your super chat in just a moment. I apologize. Just like we're seeing with the way that Norfolk Southern is being handled when people are getting sick because of this so-called controlled burn in East Palestine, we're seeing the same kind of lack of response to everything from pollution to environmental disasters to climate change. And individual things like, taking out your recycling, buying metal straws, that might help some. But the truth is, where this lies in the hands of are corporations and governments. We can only do so much. A corporation pollutes so much that if every single individual did individualized things to help curb climate change, it's not going to change without these companies being held responsible for their irresponsible behavior when it comes to climate. And, we have had developments in alternatives to fossil fuels for years. However, those steps aren't being taken in order to get to that point because there's too much profit, and the transition itself might lose millionaires and billionaires money. So that's where we're at. Not the greatest news. So, I will go ahead and hit the last of the super chats. And if you guys can, as I had mentioned earlier, Louis came on at the beginning of the show to talk about Louis DeAngelis, to talk about the reporting he's been doing in East Palestine. He was there from Monday of last week to Friday of last week. We have not rolled out all of our content because they were literally dozens and dozens of hours of content from scientists, from organizations that were there, and from residents who are still saying that they're sick, still saying that they don't know if it's safe. We're talking about testing that is not being properly monitored by the EPA, not proper testing being done. Are the whistle blowing that local residents are saying it's hard for them to get assistance from Norfolk Southern. Please join us to help get Louis back on the ground at statuscoup.com/join. You guys can join for even $5 a month. Status Coup, we don't take any corporate money. We don't have any advertisers. I'm not here like peddling gold subsidy IRAs to you guys or timeshares in between the segments. We rely on the super chats, which you guys do, which is awesome. We rely on our membership so that we could set our monthly budgets, and we rely on people that are able to give and donate. You can also follow us at substack.statuscoup.com in order to get updates sooner than you will be seeing them on YouTube. So we update that regularly. We'll also be rolling out written investigative pieces there on other issues, maybe more broad digging that we're doing. I plan to start doing some pieces on state and local legislation that's getting passed across the country. So check us out there for updates on you'll get live streams in advance, sometimes before you'll get the notifications from YouTube. You'll also get notifications of when we upload our newest video, which YouTube doesn't always show, and you'll get our written content. So let's see. Let's roll into the rest of the super chats here. Tony D. I love Zaina, Louis, and Steve. Thanks, Tony, and thank you so much for the super chat. And thanks for joining us all the time. You're awesome, and we love that you're part of the Status Coup community. Let's see. We've got Tony D again. Living in the U.S. should be classified as an illness. Whew. Unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do as a country to make this a place where, you know, folks can prosper. The UN has said we're closer to the brink, more of a second and third world country economy because of the massive wealth disparities that we have in this country. I was looking at the latest 2020 census reports, and the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reports on median incomes. Some states, individuals in some states like West Virginia and Kentucky, the median incomes are only $26,000 a year. How do you live with $26,000 a year when your car payment? Oh, my batteries. What happened? There we go. Okay, my computer became unplugged. We're good now. So in places like Kentucky and the states where the median income is so low, that means that the average person is making around $25,000 a year. The average rents in these locations for a single bedroom can be anywhere from $900 to $1,400 a month. How do people live with that? With the cost of transportation, the cost of food, the cost of basic amenities? How do they keep their lights on? Most of us have to have cell phones today to even have a job or to be able to keep in contact with family. That's a question. And, you know, now they're raising interest rates, fomenting about an inflation that isn't one, and not helping people. But please like, subscribe, join, keep up with Status Coup. We're going to be staying on the East Palestine story. We're going to be staying on what's going on. I'm coming out with a story tomorrow that's talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She recently held an event that military academies such as, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, and others joined at a student recruiting event. And there was a lot of controversy around that because she has been in the past ardently against pushing for recruitment of our youth into the military, and has acknowledged, as we were talking about on our show yesterday with veteran Craig Bowden, that poverty is the draft. It's one of the only ways that individuals can get out of poverty today and have opportunities to buy homes, to go to college. And that's a problem. That should be an opportunity to anyone. You shouldn't have to sign your life over to the military to be able to do that. So we're going to be talking about the story around that, give more details. A video will be coming out about that tomorrow. We'll also be rolling out more content from Louis, so keep an eye out for that. And join us tomorrow. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we'll have the amazing Kim Brown at 5 tomorrow. She's awesome. So keep an eye out. Thanks for joining us, and I hope all of you guys have an amazing night.